Have you ever noticed that the deeper you dive into your own consciousness, the smaller your circle becomes? That peculiar phenomenon where your phone rings less frequently, where invitations become sparse, where you find yourself sitting in silence while others engage in conversations that feel like echoes from a life you no longer inhabit? This is not a coincidence, nor is it a personal failing. This solitude that accompanies spiritual awakening is one of the most misunderstood aspects of consciousness expansion. And today, we are going to explore the 5 uncomfortable truths about why those who walk the path of authentic awakening often find themselves with fewer friends, not because they are antisocial, but because they have outgrown the frequency of superficial connection. Think of a snake shedding its skin. The old covering that once protected it becomes constrictive, suffocating, no longer serving the creature that continues to grow within. Yet the snake cannot partially shed its skin, keeping the comfortable parts while discarding the rest. It must release the entire layer, emerging raw and vulnerable but fundamentally transformed. This is what happens when consciousness expands beyond conventional boundaries. You cannot keep one foot in the world of awakening and another in the realm of unconscious living. The transition demands a complete metamorphosis, and this metamorphosis naturally creates distance between who you were and who you are becoming, between the relationships that nourished your sleeping self and the connections that will nurture your awakening spirit. The first dark truth that defines you is this: your tolerance for unconscious conversation has dramatically diminished. Where once you could spend hours discussing weather, celebrity gossip, and complaints about mundane circumstances, you now find these interactions draining, almost painful. Your friends notice your withdrawal from group conversations, your absent responses when they share the latest drama from their workplace or their opinions about situations they have not deeply examined. They perceive your silence as judgment, your introspection as superiority, when in reality you are simply unable to invest your energy in discussions that feel hollow compared to the profound questions that now occupy your mind. You have tasted the depth of authentic inquiry, and returning to surface-level chatter feels like trying to quench your thirst with sugar water after drinking from a mountain spring. The second truth cuts even deeper. Your values have shifted so fundamentally that you no longer find common ground with people who were once your closest companions. The things they pursue with passion, the goals they consider worthy of their life force, the achievements they celebrate and the losses they mourn, all of this feels like watching a movie about a life you vaguely remember living but can no longer relate to. They speak of accumulating possessions, climbing social ladders, winning arguments, securing their image, and you listen with the compassion of someone observing children playing games that they believe to be of ultimate importance. This is not arrogance, though others may interpret it as such. This is the natural consequence of recognizing that the game itself is an illusion, that the prizes being fought over are made of the same insubstantial material as dreams. The third truth reveals itself in your relationship to time and energy. You have become fiercely protective of your inner space, recognizing it as sacred territory that cannot be invaded by every casual acquaintance who wants to share their unprocessed emotional chaos. Where once you were available for every phone call, every social gathering, every dramatic crisis that required your attention, you now understand that your consciousness is not a public resource to be depleted by anyone who demands it. This selectivity is often perceived as selfishness by those who benefited from your previous availability, but you have learned that preserving your inner stillness is not selfish, it is essential. A well cannot give water if it is constantly being drained, and consciousness cannot expand if it is perpetually scattered across the needs and wants of others. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. When did you first realize that your growth was creating distance between you and the people you once felt closest to? That moment when you looked around and understood that your questions were too deep, your insights too uncomfortable, your very presence a mirror that reflected back to others their own unconscious patterns in ways that made them squirm. That instant when you realized you had become someone they could no longer fully recognize, someone whose very existence challenged the assumptions they needed to maintain about reality in order to feel safe. I know this recognition can feel like standing on a mountaintop in a blizzard, magnificent and terrifying simultaneously. You see clearly for miles in every direction, but the wind cuts through you with an intensity that makes you wonder if the view is worth the isolation. And the most challenging part is not the loneliness itself, but the questioning of your own sanity. The voice that whispers, maybe you are the one who is wrong. Maybe you should just pretend to care about the things they care about. Smile at the jokes that no longer seem funny. Nod in agreement with perspectives that feel fundamentally misguided. I want you to know that this experience is not only normal, It is necessary. Your solitude is not a punishment, it is a purification. And your voice, your story, your acknowledgement of this journey can serve as a beacon for others who are walking this same lonely path. So I invite you to share a piece of your experience in the comments below. You can copy this phrase and complete it. I knew I had outgrown my old friendships when, by sharing your truth, you create permission for others to acknowledge theirs. You remind someone else that they are not crazy, they are not wrong. They are simply evolving in a world that often punishes evolution. This community of awakening souls, scattered across the globe, strengthens every time we recognize each other across the digital divide. Let your comment be a light in someone else's darkness, a confirmation that the path of authentic growth, however lonely, is walked by more people than we often realize. Now let us continue exploring the territory of conscious solitude and what it reveals about the nature of authentic relationship. The fourth truth that emerges as you walk deeper into awakening is perhaps the most paradoxical. Your capacity for love has expanded dramatically, but your ability to tolerate unconscious behavior has diminished proportionally. You love humanity more deeply than ever before, seeing through the illusions and defenses to the frightened child within every adult, recognizing the divine spark that animates even the most unconscious individuals. Yet this expanded love makes it increasingly difficult to engage with the personality structures, the ego games, the unconscious cruelty that people inflict upon themselves and others. You love the essence of who they are while being unable to participate in the dramas of who they think they are. This creates a unique form of suffering that few understand. You sit across from someone you have known for years, watching them repeat patterns that clearly create suffering in their life, and you feel your heart breaking not with judgment, but with the pure sadness of witnessing someone trapped in a prison of their own making. You want to reach across the space between you and shake them gently awake, to show them the keys to their own freedom that lie scattered around their feet. But you have learned that awakening cannot be forced, that consciousness cannot be given as a gift no matter how desperately you wish you could share what you have discovered. There is a particular agony in loving someone who cannot love themselves, in seeing someone's true beauty while they remain committed to their self-hatred, in recognizing someone's infinite potential while they insist on defining themselves by their limitations. Your friends wonder why you have become so quiet in their presence, why you no longer offer advice or try to solve their problems, not realizing that your silence comes not from lack of caring, but from the recognition that their healing must come from within, that your attempts to save them might actually prevent them from finding their own strength. You begin to understand what the mystics meant when they spoke of impersonal love, a love so vast that it embraces all beings without needing them to change, without requiring them to meet your expectations or validate your insights. This love does not depend on reciprocity or understanding. It simply flows from the recognition that consciousness is the same in everyone, regardless of how deeply it may be buried beneath layers of conditioning and fear. Yet learning to love impersonally while living in a world of very personal relationships requires a level of emotional maturity that can feel overwhelming at times. The people in your life begin to sense this shift, even if they cannot articulate it. They feel the absence of your previous neediness, your former attempts to manage their emotions or fix their problems, and some experience this as a loss even though what you are offering now is infinitely more valuable. They mistake your peaceful presence for disinterest, your non-reactivity for coldness, your acceptance for indifference. They do not understand that you have learned to love them enough to allow them their own journey, even when that journey includes making choices that cause them suffering. This type of love requires you to develop an almost superhuman level of detachment, not the cold withdrawal that people often mistake for spiritual detachment, but the warm presence that can witness suffering without being consumed by it, that can see potential without becoming attached to outcomes. You learn to hold space for others' growth without taking responsibility for their choices, to offer support without trying to control results, to care deeply while remaining ultimately free. This creates a profound dilemma. How do you love someone whose very presence triggers your awareness of suffering, whose unconscious patterns feel like fingernails on the chalkboard of your heightened sensitivity? How do you maintain compassion for someone whose complaints about their self-created problems feel like watching someone repeatedly hit themselves with a hammer while asking why their head hurts? The answer lies not in lowering your consciousness to meet them where they are, but in developing the skill to hold space for their unconsciousness without being pulled into it, to offer love without requiring that they receive it in the form you wish to give it. The fifth, and perhaps most liberating truth is this: you have discovered that quality of connection matters infinitely more than quantity. One conversation with someone who understands the language of depth can nourish your soul more than months of surface-level interaction with dozens of acquaintances. You would rather spend an evening in solitude, communing with the vastness of your own consciousness, than attending a party where you must wear a mask of who you used to be. This is not misanthropy, it is discernment. You have learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between isolation and sacred solitude. The people who remain in your life after this great shedding are there not because of shared history or social convenience, but because of genuine resonance. They are fellow travelers on the path of awakening, or at least individuals who respect your journey even if they do not understand it. These relationships, fewer in number but infinitely richer in quality, become laboratories for practicing authentic connection, spaces where you can explore the depths of what is possible when two conscious beings choose to meet in truth, rather than hide behind personas. But let us be honest about the challenges this truth presents. There are nights when the silence feels heavier than usual, when you wonder if the price of awakening is too high, if perhaps unconscious connection is better than conscious solitude. These moments of doubt are not signs that you have chosen wrongly. They are the growing pains of a consciousness learning to exist in a world that often punishes authenticity. The sadness you feel is not for the relationships you have lost, but for the realization of how rare deep connection truly is, how few people are willing to risk the vulnerability that authentic relationship requires. Yet within this apparent loneliness lies a profound discovery. When you are no longer dependent on others for your sense of identity, when you are not performing for approval or hiding to avoid rejection, you become available for a quality of connection that most people never experience. You discover that true intimacy is not about finding someone who completes you, but about becoming so whole within yourself that you can meet another whole being without neediness, without agenda, without the compulsion to fix or change or possess them. This is the great paradox of conscious relationship. The less you need other people, the more genuinely you can love them. The more comfortable you become with your own company, the more valuable your presence becomes to others. Your solitude is not empty space waiting to be filled. It is fertile ground from which authentic connection can grow. The journey of awakening necessarily involves periods of profound aloneness, not as punishment, but as preparation. You are learning to source your own validation, to find your own center, to recognize your own worth independent of external confirmation. This self-sourcing becomes the foundation for all future relationships, ensuring that you connect with others from wholeness rather than neediness, from choice rather than compulsion. Consider the possibility that your current solitude is not a problem to be solved, but a sacred passage to be honored. Every moment spent in authentic relationship with yourself prepares you for authentic relationship with others. Every hour of conscious solitude deepens your capacity for conscious connection. You are not becoming antisocial, you are becoming selectively social, choosing quality over quantity, depth over breadth, truth over comfort. There is an ancient wisdom in this solitude that modern society has forgotten. Indigenous cultures understood the necessity of periods of isolation for spiritual development, the vision quest that required individuals to spend time alone in the wilderness until they could hear the voice of their own soul above the noise of collective conditioning. Your apartment or your room has become your wilderness, your meditation cushion, your sacred mountain, your inner journey as vital and transformative as any external pilgrimage. In these moments of aloneness, you discover layers of yourself that can only emerge in silence. The constant chatter of social interaction, however meaningful, creates a kind of static that interferes with the delicate frequencies of inner guidance. When you remove yourself from the electromagnetic field of other people's needs, expectations, and emotions, you begin to sense the subtle currents of your own consciousness, the whispered guidance that was always there but previously drowned out by the din of social obligation. This solitude teaches you to become comfortable with the unknown aspects of yourself, the parts that do not fit into neat categories or social roles. You discover that much of your previous identity was constructed through interaction with others, defined by their responses to you, shaped by their needs and expectations. In the absence of external mirrors, you must learn to see yourself directly, without the mediating influence of other people's perceptions. This direct self-knowledge can be initially disorienting, like looking in a mirror for the first time and realizing you do not look the way you imagined. Yet this disorientation gives way to a profound liberation. When you are no longer dependent on external validation to know who you are, you become free to explore aspects of yourself that might not be socially acceptable or easily understood. You can be strange, contradictory, indefinable without needing to explain or justify these qualities to anyone. Your solitude becomes a laboratory for authentic self-expression, a space where you can experiment with different ways of being without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. Many people fear solitude because they have been taught that being alone means being lonely. that isolation equals abandonment, that spending time with yourself is somehow selfish or antisocial. But you have discovered the difference between chosen solitude and imposed isolation, between the richness of your own company and the poverty of external dependency. Your alone time is not empty space waiting to be filled, but fertile ground where insights grow, where creativity flourishes, where the soul can finally exhale after holding its breath in social situations that demand performance rather than presence. In this solitude, you begin to recognize the voice of your own wisdom, distinct from the voices of parents, teachers, friends, and society that have been speaking through you for so long. This inner voice does not shout or demand attention. It whispers like wind through leaves, gentle but persistent, offering guidance that comes not from external authority, but from the deepest parts of your own knowing. Learning to trust this voice requires the kind of quiet that only solitude can provide. The dark truths we have explored tonight are not meant to discourage you, but to normalize your experience, to help you understand that the loneliness of awakening is a temporary phase in a larger transformation. You are not losing the capacity for friendship, you are developing the capacity for fellowship. You are not becoming isolated, you are becoming integrated. The people who belong in your life will find their way to you, drawn by the authenticity you have fought so hard to cultivate. In a world that often values social networking over genuine connection, your commitment to depth is a revolutionary act. In a culture that mistakes being busy with being important, your willingness to sit in silence is a form of resistance. In a society that equates popularity with worth, your selective solitude is a declaration of independence from the tyranny of other people's approval. Trust that your current aloneness is preparing you for relationships of unprecedented depth and beauty. Trust that every superficial connection you have released has created space for something more authentic to emerge. Trust that your growth, however isolating it may feel in the moment, is contributing to the collective awakening of humanity. Your willingness to be real in a world of pretense gives others permission to drop their masks. Your courage to stand in truth when others hide in comfortable lies creates a field of possibility for deeper connection. The spiritual path is not a journey away from relationship, but toward more authentic relationship. It requires periods of solitude, not because connection is unimportant, but because conscious connection is so important that it demands we do the inner work necessary to show up as our true selves rather than our defensive selves. During these periods of apparent isolation, something remarkable happens. You begin to shed the false identities that were constructed through social interaction, the personas that were developed to meet others' expectations or to protect yourself from their judgment. Layer by layer, these artificial aspects of self fall away, until what remains is startlingly simple and profoundly authentic. You discover that much of what you believe to be your personality was actually a complex system of adaptations designed to help you navigate social situations, but ultimately preventing you from knowing who you truly are beneath all the programming. This stripping away process can be initially terrifying. Without your familiar roles and identities to hide behind, you may feel naked, exposed, uncertain of your own worth or value. The compliments and validation that once sustained your self-image are no longer available, forcing you to find your sense of worth from within. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the solitary journey, learning to source your own validation rather than depending on others to reflect back your value. Yet as you learn to sit with this uncertainty, to be present with the unknown aspects of yourself without immediately rushing to define or categorize them, something beautiful emerges. A deeper sense of self begins to crystallize, one that is not dependent on external circumstances or other people's opinions. This authentic self has a quality of stillness and presence that is immediately recognizable to others who have done similar inner work. It radiates a kind of calm confidence that comes not from knowing all the answers, but from being comfortable with questions, not from having figured everything out, but from being at peace with the mystery. When this authentic self begins to emerge from the chrysalis of solitude, it naturally attracts different types of relationships. The people who are drawn to you now are not seeking entertainment, distraction, or someone to complete them. They are seeking resonance, recognition, the rare pleasure of meeting another human being who has learned to be genuinely present rather than performatively engaged. These relationships have a quality that most people never experience, a depth and richness that comes from two complete beings choosing to share their completeness rather than two incomplete beings trying to use each other to fill their emptiness. The conversations that emerge from this level of connection are unlike anything you experienced in your previous relationships. There is no need to maintain a facade, no pressure to be impressive or agreeable, no fear that your authentic thoughts or feelings will be rejected or misunderstood. You can speak from your depths, knowing that you will be met there. that your vulnerability will be honored rather than exploited, that your truth will be received as a gift rather than a burden. These conscious relationships become mirrors in the truest sense, not reflecting back what you want to see or what you fear about yourself, but revealing the beauty and complexity of who you actually are. In the presence of someone who sees you clearly, you see yourself more clearly. In the company of someone who accepts you completely, you learn to accept yourself more completely. This mutual recognition creates a field of possibility where both beings can continue to evolve and expand without fear of losing the connection. But perhaps the most remarkable quality of these relationships is their lack of neediness. Because each person has learned to find wholeness within themselves, there is no desperate clinging, no attempt to possess or control the other, no fear that distance or disagreement will threaten the bond. The relationship exists not because of dependence but because of choice, not because of what each person can get from the other, but because of what they can create together. So embrace your sacred aloneness. Honor the silence that others fear. Celebrate the depth that intimidates those committed to surface-level existence. You are not broken because you need fewer friends. You are awakening because you require more authentic connection. This is not a failure of your social skills, but a success of your spiritual discernment. The quality of your consciousness is calling forth the quality of relationship that matches it. And sometimes, this process requires clearing space by releasing what no longer serves your highest becoming. There is a profound intelligence at work in this process of social refinement, though it may not always feel intelligent when you are sitting in your empty apartment on a Friday night, watching your phone remain silent while your former friends gather in places you no longer wish to be. The universe is not randomly removing people from your life or punishing you for growing. It is responding to the vibrational frequency you are now emanating, which no longer matches the frequency of unconscious connection. Like a radio being tuned to a clearer station, you are gradually moving away from the static of superficial interaction and toward the clarity of authentic communion. This process requires tremendous trust, especially during the transition periods when old relationships have fallen away, but new ones have not yet emerged. You may feel like a traveler crossing a bridge that burns behind you while the destination ahead remains shrouded in mist. Each step requires faith that you are moving towards something more beautiful than what you are leaving behind, even when the evidence for this faith is not yet visible. These are the moments when doubt whispers its familiar poison. Maybe you are being too picky, too demanding, too idealistic in your expectations of human connection. But remember that every great transformation requires a death before the rebirth. The caterpillar must completely dissolve before the butterfly can emerge. The seed must decay before the plant can grow. Your old social identity must dissolve before your authentic relational self can crystallize. This dissolution is not comfortable, but it is necessary. You cannot become who you are meant to be while clinging to who you used to be, and this includes clinging to relationship patterns that served your unconscious self but cannot nourish your awakening spirit. During these transitional periods, your solitude becomes your teacher, your healer, your initiation into deeper levels of self-knowledge. You learn to find companionship in silence, wisdom in stillness, love in the vast space of your own consciousness. This is not a consolation prize for the lack of human connection, but a discovery of richness that most people never access because they are too afraid to be alone with themselves. You discover that consciousness itself is the ultimate companion, vast enough to hold all your questions, patient enough to allow all your confusion, loving enough to accept all your imperfections. This relationship with your own consciousness becomes the foundation for all other relationships. When you are no longer afraid of your own company, you no longer tolerate the company of people who diminish you. When you have learned to source love from within, you no longer accept scraps of affection from those who cannot love fully. When you have discovered the peace that exists in your own depths, you no longer sacrifice this peace to maintain connections that require you to abandon yourself. What emerges from this apparent darkness is a light more brilliant than you can currently imagine. Relationships built on mutual recognition rather than mutual neediness. Connections forged in the fire of truth rather than the comfort of shared illusions. Friendships that nourish the soul rather than drain it. That celebrate your growth rather than resist it. That meet you in your depths rather than require you to swim in shallows. Trust the process of conscious selection that is occurring in your life. Trust that every ending is creating space for a more beautiful beginning. Trust that your willingness to be alone with yourself is preparing you for companionship with others who have done the same courageous work. The universe is not punishing you with solitude, it is preparing you for communion. If these reflections on the sacred nature of conscious solitude have resonated with something deep within your own experience, know that you have found your tribe. even if we are scattered across the globe and connected only by recognition rather than proximity. The path of awakening can feel profoundly lonely, but you are never truly alone. Every person who chooses depth over shallowness, authenticity over performance, conscious solitude over unconscious connection is contributing to a collective field of awakening consciousness that touches every being on the planet. This channel exists as a gathering place for souls who have discovered that true spirituality is not about escaping the human experience, but about bringing consciousness to every aspect of it, including the challenge of maintaining authentic relationships in a world that often rewards pretense. When you subscribe, you join a community of seekers who understand that the spiritual path sometimes requires walking alone for a while, not because isolation is the goal, but because authentic connection requires authentic individuals. We are here to explore the mystery of consciousness together, to validate the experiences that others might dismiss or pathologize, to find language for the ineffable transformations that occur when awareness expands beyond its familiar boundaries. Each video is an invitation to go deeper, to question more courageously, to trust your own direct experience even when it contradicts everything you were taught to believe about reality. If you have felt the peculiar loneliness of outgrowing your old friendships, if you have experienced the strange freedom of no longer needing others to validate your perception of reality, if you have discovered that conscious solitude can be more nourishing than unconscious connection, then this is your sanctuary. Subscribe and allow yourself to be supported by reflections that honor both the challenge and the privilege of walking the path of awakening. Together we form an invisible network of consciousness, each finding our own way but connected by the courage to question, to grow, to evolve beyond the limitations that once defined us. Your presence here, your willingness to engage with these ideas, your commitment to your own awakening contributes to the awakening of all. In a world that desperately needs the medicine of authentic consciousness, your individual growth is a gift to the collective healing that our planet requires.